And next, Crystal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone, good evening. I'm Crystal Jacobson. I'm the Deputy Director for the Placer County Community Development Resource Agency in Tahoe.
And next we will go to Jamie.
Good evening, I'm Jamie Payne. I am the Supervising Code Compliance Officer and supervise the short-term rental program out of the Tahoe office.
And next we will move to Tim.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Tim Wegner. I'm a Deputy Director again with Community Development Resource Agency. Primarily, I'm the Chief Building Official, oversee the building department for the county, and I'm glad to participate with this event tonight.
We're glad to have you. And then finally, Doug.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Doug Jastro. I'm the Revenue Services Manager, also the Transient Occupancy Tax Administrator. So all things TOT. Hopefully I can answer all your questions on that if you have any.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And then I will introduce myself. My name is Lindsay Romack, and I'm Supervisor Gustafson's District Director. I'll also be serving as facilitator for this evening to help move things along. So again, thank you all for coming. And now I will pass it over to Supervisor Gustafson.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks for everybody participating. It looks like we have, gosh, 133 attendees. So what a great turnout tonight on this important topic in our community. And it's not an easy topic, and we have quite a team of folks at the county working on it, and they're great resources on this very important issue. But before we start tonight, I wanted to outline how the meeting will work a bit. Lindsay covered the Q&A function. Use that to type in any questions that you have, and we will try to summarize those and respond to as many as we can tonight. And for those who need a response, if you want to give us your name or your email, we can also get back to you with responses on questions if we don't get through them tonight. I'm going to start the meeting with a few updates on some other county business other than short-term rentals, because we do have a lot going on in Placer County right now and want to make sure you're aware of some upcoming meetings. And then we will get back to discussing the short-term rental issues. But again, please use that chat or the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screen on those questions. So Lindsay, why don't we go ahead and put up the updates, and I'll go through those.
Can everyone see the slides?
Yes, but let's, go to the updates. Okay. So the good news, I think you've all been tracking, is that we're in really positive shape. From our peak in December, we've really seen a continued decrease in COVID cases. We will most likely, unless there's some major change, move to the red tier, meaning restaurants and theaters can go to 25%, retail can go to 50% on next Tuesday. The governor today did announce that he may revise the tiers again to give us credit for vaccinations, and our county is doing extraordinarily well with vaccinations. We have per capita delivered more vaccine doses than anyone in our region and then most areas of the state. I think we're in the top 5 or 6 counties in the whole state in getting vaccine doses out. So we'd welcome him adding that criteria, because we have put a lot of emphasis on getting doses in arms. Over 100,000 doses have been administered in Placer County to date. Out of our 400,000 folks, about 50,000, it's hard to judge because some are second doses and first doses, but we've done really well in getting our most vulnerable vaccinated, our educators and our essential workers, and that is continuing on. Our county health department itself has delivered about 30,000 of those vaccine doses, and then our partners in our healthcare providers have administered the rest. So good news, stay tuned. Hopefully red tier next Tuesday, and maybe even better, because our most of our marks are in the orange tier, the next tier up. And with vaccinations counting toward it, we could really move to reopen a little more quickly. Workforce housing. As you all know, housing, when we talk about short-term rentals, it's inextricably, excuse me, connected to housing and how our housing is used in our region. And we have been working diligently for the last several years on workforce housing. We adopted a program at the Board of Supervisors, 2 weeks ago now, on workforce housing preservation program. And what that will do, it will really address the missing middle, the teachers and the nurses and the young employees and young professionals who want to buy and have a home up here like many of us got to do. And we will help them get into those homes by buying deed restrictions that would restrict the homes to people that work in the community within the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District boundaries for 30 hours a week. Is the minimum. They must work full time at a site that is located within our school district boundaries. So it's a great program. We're really excited to roll it out, and we hope to be seeing that come forward pretty quickly. We've allocated some funds for it, and I'll talk about the T-bid in a minute, but if the T-bid passes, we anticipate being able to even fund that more. There's a lot of help at the state and federal level for low-income housing. This would provide us that area between 80% of AMI going up to almost 220% of AMI for our young professionals and folks really wanting to put down roots in our community and have that dream of home ownership here. Next thing I wanted to mention quickly is that the California Insurance Commissioner, Laura, we've worked with him very closely. I have, as well as our staff, on a lot of the issues we've been facing with non-renewals on fire insurance. It's incredibly challenging topic. And Commissioner Lara is going to be hosting a couple of public meetings, one on March 30th at 1 p.m. and another one on April 6th. Lindsay, I will ask you to try to put a link in the chat or get that out to folks in some manner so that they know how to tune in to those meetings. He's going to be pushing forward new rules that would allow homeowners and businesses to actually see what their wildfire risk scores are and what they can do to improve them through home hardening and defensible space. So stay tuned for that. Changes are coming. I know it's not quick enough. I know many have lost their homeowners insurance or seen a doubling or tripling of their premiums. We have been doing everything we could at the county level, but it's really governed by the state. And so trying to feed our information to the state for their action. The next item I wanted to make sure you're aware of, next Tuesday is the final hearing on what I called the T-bid earlier. For those of you who don't know, that's the Tourism Business Improvement District. I could go on for a long time on that, but I would suggest you go to the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association website to get more details on that. We had a town hall meeting on that last week or a week before and get answers to that. Oh, the Breakfast Club also had a meeting on that. But that would generate new revenue to the community and free up some of this valuable TOT money, which we could then use for housing and transportation solutions. Finally, our Board of Supervisors plans to be in Tahoe, live in person, Tuesday, March 30th at the resort at Squaw Creek. And at that meeting, we will be considering the ordinance that we're presenting tonight. So you have about a month to give us feedback, ask questions, and final feedback would be due at that meeting on March 30th. Obviously, we love to get your feedback sooner because the reason we're doing this tonight is we know we can always improve what we're proposing with your input. And we really urge you to participate both tonight and get the word out about that March 30th meeting as well. So again, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. I know that short-term rentals are extremely challenging issue for our community, and never more so than a COVID pandemic to bring out kind of the largest challenges we faced. So much of it revolved around the stay-at-home order initially, and our ordinance was the only thing we had in place that could potentially have addressed the stay-at-home order. What we found out is that our ordinance really didn't give us the teeth we needed to do more on short-term rentals. During the pandemic and during the shutdown, we did a lot, and our incredible staff were responding to hundreds and hundreds of questions and comments and reports of people renting their homes. We investigated a lot of those, but many were second homeowners or their families choosing to quarantine in the Tahoe area, and we couldn't stop that. Nor could we really stop the rentals. We warned people, but our enforcement and our district attorney, as well as our sheriff, we had challenges in enforcement as to what truly we had the legal authority to do on the stay-at-home order, because it was a state order, not a county order. So really challenging times, and we know that everybody was faced with a lot of dilemmas on what we do with the growth in short-term rentals. So Lindsay, I'm going to ask you to go to that next slide. Many of you have seen this slide before. This is really work that we did with the Mountain Housing Council to talk about short-term rentals and how many of our housing units are being used as short-term rentals. So we have today in our region about 3,500 short-term rentals out of our housing units. By and large, most of our homes are vacation homes, second homes, and have been for decades and decades and decades. Most of our housing stock was built as a vacation home for somebody, not for a full-time residence. And we've certainly seen that in the last 15 years, we've lost about 40% of our full-time population. Now, I know many of us have lots of stories that we're seeing houses occupied now, and people have moved up here because they can virtually work from our region, which has been great. So we haven't captured those numbers yet. But when we did the work, you can see the numbers in front of you of the challenges that we really face in the numbers of homes that are either unoccupied or being or part-time occupied and used as short-term rentals. Lindsay, if you can go on to the next slide.
And it doesn't want to advance.
It doesn't, yes. And so short-term rentals are about 3,500. There are TOT certificates in excess of that, and this is how those break down in our TOT certificates. Now, some of those are exempted. For instance, if you have a unit within the resort at Squaw Creek, for instance, a hotel, you might have a TOT certificate, but not need a short-term rental separate permit because you're in a commercially zoned property and that is managed and has a front desk 24/7 and takes care of the noise, trash, and parking issues. So you'll see these numbers don't quite match the 3,500, but it gives you a good indication of the breakdown. About 2,400 of these are single family homes. And then you see the breakdown with duplex, triplex, and apartments being very small. And then of course, the huge number of condominiums that we have in our region. And I think most of you know that those condominiums, most of those were developed in the 70s. And most of those, at least initially, had rental offices built right into their opening gates. There was a place that you walked in to rent your condo or to check into your condo right there at the front. 62% of our short-term rentals are professionally managed through a local management company, and 38% are privately managed. They're all required to have a local contact that can respond within 60 minutes. All of them are, but 38% are privately managed, meaning those are typically the VRBO and Airbnb properties where the owner is directly paying for housekeeping and maintenance and other activities directly themselves. So what have we been doing? Well, I took office and I feel like short-term rentals was the very first hot topic we were dealing with in a long line of subsequent hot topics. But we started working on short-term rentals leading into the July 2019 Board of Supervisors meeting, where we had a unanimous decision by the Board of Supervisors to create a new ordinance to really address short-term rentals. We hadn't had an ordinance before, and we couldn't cite, we couldn't penalize and address some of the nuisance issues until we drafted an ordinance. So we spent that fall holding some workshops and meeting with property management firms and individuals, had a number of workshops. The board approved that ordinance in November of 2019, and then it takes 2 readings, and the ordinance took effect in January. And then, gosh, it was less than a month and a half later, we had COVID, and we had the stay-at-home order, which really kind of turned everything that we were planning to do with the ordinance upside down, because all of our energy went into trying to keep short-term rentals from being rented versus addressing the nuisance issues, which is what we had addressed the ordinance about. Noise, trash, parking were the primary issues that we addressed in the ordinance. And all of a sudden we had this stay-at-home order by the governor, and we were trying to make our ordinance match that. So we spent a lot of time on that. We continued to give extensions on when you needed to get your short-term rental permit in, because we realized you weren't supposed to be renting and income wouldn't be coming in. And so we wanted to make sure we extended that. So in July, we were finally able to get the program up and running. And then of course we had a second shutdown, but we had a pretty good summer. And a lot of issues, and we're going to report some of the nuisance issues that we did address during the summer months when we were operational. You'll see that slide in just a minute. But we're back up and running. We really feel we haven't had adequate time to fully test and implement this program, because we've been jumping back and forth between stay-at-home orders. And I tell you, the staff have been so extremely dedicated to educating the public, to helping the public through this. And I can't thank Jamie, Crystal, Tim, everybody involved, Doug, for all the work they've put in trying to help us get this back up and running. The ordinance revisions that we're proposing to bring back, we're vetting it tonight with you and then taking input. They're relatively minor clarifications for the most part. There's nothing significantly new proposed. We'd really like to have a full year under normal operations to test this better, but we're learning a lot as we go. And ordinances, this is what we do. We roll them out, we don't anticipate every issue, and we come back and we tweak them and we make clarifications where necessary. So we want to hear from you what's working, what isn't working, both from you that are neighbors of short-term rentals, as well as those of you operating short-term rentals. We want to work together to solve some of the issues that have concerned our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Crystal Jacobson, and she's going to walk you through some more about the short-term rental, the proposals.
Thank you, Cindy. We can get the next slide up, Lindsay. So again, I'm Crystal Jacobson. I'm the Deputy Director out of the Tahoe Community Development Resource Agency, and am now overseeing the short-term rental program, working with Jamie Payne, who will present on the updates in just a minute. But I work with her on really administering this program out of our Tahoe City office. So I want to first point out that we have been kind of growing our team. As the ordinance has been implemented, we've been growing our team. We now have, well, let me first state, when we first started the program, we started with only a half of a position. So half of a supervisor position out of our Auburn office. We had no dedicated enforcement staff in the Tahoe office. We had one extra clerk to help get the program kind of launched. But now it's staffed out of the Tahoe office. So what we have here, you'll see we have 1.5 staff positions for enforcement. So we have one full-time enforcement officer and then another officer who handles short-term rental enforcement along with traditional code enforcement. We have a full-time supervisor who's Jamie Payne, who will speak tonight on the updates that we're presenting to you. And then we also have a full-time clerk dedicated, and we are continuing to look for opportunities to grow the team to administer this program. As Cindy noted earlier, we have estimated approximately 3,500 short-term rentals in our Tahoe region. However, to date, we have approximately 3,000 of those that are permitted through our program. So we continue to bring those other 500 units into compliance with our code. So in terms of the ordinance update, Jamie is going to kind of walk you through and give you an overview of the ordinance, talk through some frequently asked questions that we get, and then she will touch on the updates and also talk about enforcement statistics. But what I want to note first is that the ordinance, what we're bringing forward or proposing now, are really it's really a cleanup. I think we have heard this last year. There's a lot of areas in the ordinance where there was a lot of question. And so we felt that we needed to bring some revisions to our board that would really kind of clean up the ordinance and provide clarity. So that's really what Jamie's going to present to you today. That's not to say that we want to hear you and take your input today and make some tweaks where we can in response to the input that we received today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to kind of, again, walk you through, kind of give you an overview. Then she'll touch on the ordinance updates, and then we can take questions at the end.
Great, thank you, Crystal. As said, I'm Jamie Payne. I am the Supervising Code Compliance Officer out of the Tahoe office. I manage the short-term rental program and traditional code. What I wanted to start with tonight is just some clarification on things that come up often in conversations with our property managers, our property owners, and our guests. These are not changes, just a couple clarifications in the program information that's out in the world. So the first one, STR and TOT, which is the transient occupancy tax, are connected vitally, but they're not the same program. So I know this has been a learning point for a lot of people in our community. Transient occupant tax is a tax paid on the revenue earned from a rental. The short-term rental permit is essentially the license to operate. So you need to have a TOT certificate to have an STR permit. But again, they are two different functions within the county, administered through two different departments and have two different reasons for being. So hopefully that clears up a little bit of that piece. The next piece is really trying to create some understanding in the complaint process and the definitions. So a complaint can be made by any person at any time. They can call in a complaint to our hotline, our email, or through our Placer Connect form that's available on the webpage, and we receive those complaints. So again, a complaint is the basic, that's the starting point. From there, it's up to the enforcement officer to verify whether there's a violation. So a complaint doesn't necessarily equal a violation, it can, and we go out and find out if there is a violation in place. And then following a violation, there could be a citation depending on if the violation's resolved or not. I think it's important to understand when we look at our numbers of complaints that come in to remember that not every complaint equals a violation. Again, anybody can make a complaint and they can make 5 complaints in a row about the same property at the same time if they choose. And then following the complaint and violation process, the next piece in understanding how enforcement works is looking at our local contact allowance. So within the ordinance, we allow a 60-minute window for a complaint to be resolved by the local contact. Enforcement staff are still going to go out and confirm the resolution of the violation, or if the violation is still existing, then manage that through how the ordinance allows. But we do have the 60-minute allowance in the ordinance. So when a complaint comes in, the local contact, whether it be professionally managed or privately managed, that local contact is immediately notified of the complaint. And then toward the end of that 60-minute window, the the short-term rental enforcement officer is going to come to the property to verify if the complaint has been resolved or if we need to follow up with further information. So again, hopefully those provide a little bit of clarification as people look through our program information or understand how the program is administered. So Lindsay, if we want to go to the next one, we'll talk about the current operational standards. So currently the ordinance addresses some basically 4 main operational standards. Noise, so that's one of our larger complaints, right? And the ordinance does specify that after 10 p.m., we call it a quiet time. There is an expectation that the short-term rentals not be causing disturbances to the neighbors after 10. If there's noise earlier than 10 o'clock, it can still absolutely be addressed. If it's causing a nuisance, if it's causing a problem in a neighborhood, then our enforcement team can definitely still address that. But after 10 o'clock, that's where we have that very specific time that we're requiring no noise in the neighborhood. Following that, parking. So parking is not a set number. Every property is different, but within the ordinance and within the permit application, the number of vehicles allowed at each property need to be able to park within the property limits on approved parking. So this is no unpaved or what's called yard parking. Some properties have very large paved areas and they can accommodate more vehicles. The winter parking restrictions in Placer County are in effect, obviously, but the short-term rental parking enforcement or parking restrictions are in effect all year long. So all year long, any vehicle associated with short-term rental needs to be within that rental's property lines. On trash, bear bins are required within 12 months of a permit issuance. So this is in reference, to trash is a very important issue in our community, and not attracting bears or other animals, is a high priority. So properties belonging to an HOA or a similar setting with community style dumpsters are not required to have a bear box at each individual property, but there is a high priority put on trash being contained in an animal proof container. And occupancy within the current standard is listed at 2 per bedroom plus 2. What this means is if you have a 4-bedroom rental, you have 2 per bedroom, so that's 8 people plus 2 overall. So that's a total of 10 adult guests at that property. And currently guests under 16 years old are not counted in that number. So again, those are our current standards. And then we're going to look at some of the proposed revisions or updates. And again, these are the updates that are going to be brought before the board on March 30th. So one of the first ones is clarification on maximum occupancy. So there is an allowance in the ordinance that a property owner can request an increase in occupancy. And that's looked at with overall property size, that kind of information. But the clarification is that at no time will that exceed the building code. So even though a house may be large, or they may feel like they can put a lot of beds in there, at no time will the county ordinance exceed what the state building code is. And the language in there just clarifies that. Going on the TOT certificate, again, this is that transient occupancy tax that's paid on the income earned from a short-term rental. That process must be completed and fees paid within the start of the application. Early on, we found that some people started their TOT process, started their STR process, but didn't finish the TOT process. So again, language in the ordinance that clarifies that that needs to be completed in order to have a valid short-term rental permit. Permits expiring on March 31 of each year. This has also been something that we're trying to get some more information out, clarity, clear up some of the confusion. The way the ordinance was written is is intended that permits will expire on March 31. Further into the ordinance, it was written that it would be 12 months from date of issuance, which caused a little confusion for people. And the 12 months from date of issuance is based on the intention of the March 31 expiration. So again, in 2020, as Cindy said, we had several delays. We had several extensions in the permit in light of COVID. And unfortunately for all of us, those kinds of delays continued into late into the year. So for 2021 permits, there will be a prorated formula so that the permits issued in 2021 will expire to meet this end of the year deadline. However, if somebody got a permit late in 2020, they won't be expected to pay a full permit year renewal for 2021. A lot of information with details on how that process is going to work, what the prorated schedule looks like, and information on how to renew is going to be coming out to permit holders very soon. So I encourage you to keep an eye out. It'll be coming mostly, it'll come by email, and it will have very detailed information of how that renewal process will be working. Moving on, this is again a clarification in the parking sections that if a property allows a boat or boat trailers, that those need to be on site just as other vehicles. They need to be included in that parking area as approved and not be parked out on the street or in the side yard or things like that. Trash containment and bearware information must be posted with good neighbor information. Again, this is a very important topic for all of us in the community in keeping our trash away from the bears. The county's environmental engineering department has created some very informative flyers that we're getting out to property owners so they can share that information with their guests. Clarification that fire inspections will occur every 5 years for professionally managed properties and 3 years for privately managed. This is not a change. This is a clarification also. It was intended when the ordinance was first written that that's how the inspections would go. Just the language didn't clarify that. So this is clearing that up. A professionally managed property will have that inspection done every 5 years, privately every 3 years. Inspections are, once you have a permit, the property owner requests the inspection through their local fire district and the fire district schedules those. Again, this is the next one, clarification on fire safety at our properties. It's already in the ordinance that wood or charcoal burning fireplaces, fire pits, or grills are not allowed. That's in light of, California's high fire danger. What we found were guests were bringing their own fireplaces or fire pits. And so the ordinance has been clarified to make sure that people understand they are not to bring those. Let's see. So this is STRs cannot be rented when there's an active building permit. This is one of the few new changes in the ordinance. It's not just a clarification. This comes about in an effort to really make sure that our rental properties are safe for the guests and people that are using those. This has a process where when a building permit is applied for and the property is a short-term rental, the county staff will be able to determine if it's the type of construction that would affect safety or habitability of the property and make sure that we don't have properties out there renting to guests when they're in an unsafe situation. And lastly, we recognize that there is a need for short-term rentals to be encouraged within our town centers and our village centers. And so in the permit fee, we are proposing a 10% reduction in permit fee for a short-term rental that's located within the town center or a village center or within a quarter mile of public transit, encouraging the short-term rentals to get into those more commercial, more populated areas. I think that's the last one on there, Lindsay. I can't really see the bottom of that screen, but I believe that's the sum of our proposed updates on the current ordinance. So looking back, changing speed a little bit from the ordinance itself to our ordinance conditions. This is a brief snapshot of complaints that were received from June through January. So again, as I explained earlier, these are complaints that came in These came in either through our hotline, through emails, through calls directly to staff. You'll see that noise is by far the largest complaint. Again, it's clear that those summer months that goes up. People are outside, people are on decks, windows are open. The other thing that contributes to this high surge in numbers during the July, August, September time is this is immediately following when the state allowed travel again. So June 12th was the date that the state lifted the ban and was allowing travel. So we saw a very heavy influx of guests immediately following that and this big spike in numbers. Beyond that, calls regarding occupancy, parking, trash, those types of issues, are common for us. And I think it's worth pointing out that even through those very busy months, if you look at this 7-month total, we have around 300 complaints made, and that's out of our 3,000 permitted short-term rentals. So we do have complaints. We have enforcement staff looking at those, but it is worth noting that the majority of our properties are compliant and are working to be good neighbors. So following a kind of a look at the updates, a look at the complaints, that type of thing, our next steps in the short-term rental program, we want to remind people that these ordinance updates are being presented to the Board of Supervisors at the March 30th meeting that will be in Tahoe. The other things going on in the program are we have an improved permitting process. So prior to our new program, we had a third-party permitting and hotline vendor, and we found that there were a lot of issues regarding inconsistent data, poor customer service, and as a result of that, Placer County decided to develop our own custom permitting program, and that's being administered in-house. Creating that new program from scratch has presented a few challenges, causing some delay in the permitting process. However, we're very close to completing that new program and we'll have it available to the public very soon. That's where a lot of that renewal information is going to come from. We've also been, as Crystal mentioned, really growing our enforcement team and strengthening our enforcement presence. The hotline number is now answered directly by enforcement staff instead of callers having to go through an automated phone tree to a call center. And this allows for quicker notification to our local contacts and property managers and a reduction in the missed or incorrect information that the caller has. Again, on the enforcement side, we have recently added a full-time enforcement officer. He is 100% dedicated to short-term rentals and will be working through the weekend evening hours. And that's in addition to the enforcement officer that we've had on staff already and myself, who can act in an enforcement capacity. In anticipation of the increased call volume during the summer months, we have planned for additional staffing to assist during those busy weekend and holiday periods. We know that it will get busy once the weather gets nicer. Enforcement officers are responding to calls and doing area and neighborhood checks in vehicles that are very visibly branded with the STR program information so that our residents and guests both know that our program is out there, it is in effect, and our officers are always available to chat with people about what the program's doing, provide resources, provide handouts, that type of thing. And we're always working to continue our education of guests and homeowners. We are continuing to develop and share those resources like the Bear Aware information with property owners and guests, educating them on the importance of being good neighbors and ensuring that there's a very full understanding of the rules and expectations for short-term rentals for both our guests and our property owners.
Great, thank you, Jamie. So that concludes our presentation, but we wanted real quick just to put up some contact information for you. So there's really two routes for contact if you're trying to contact staff to get questions. So if you have questions on the program itself or on your permit, just general administrative questions, you use this program information web address here that you see, email address and phone number. So that is answered in office by staff. Monday through Friday. And then for complaints, we have a separate number. It's a hotline that you see here on the slide. So that's for if you've got, a problem with a neighbor who has, some guests there and there's trouble with, noise complaints or parking, that kind of thing, you would call the complaint hotline for that. That number, as Jamie noted, is staffed all day and into the evening. We have very minimal gaps in terms of the time that is not available to call in the evenings. Really, the only gaps are Tuesday and Wednesday nights, late into the night. So it is answered during the day, but those are the 2 days where we're not as busy on the short-term rental program. And so those 2 nights, we don't have anybody answering late into the night. On the other nights, someone's answering that phone all the way until midnight. And then on Sunday mornings right now, that number, there's also a small gap, but that's changing. We're bringing in some enforcement for that. So that again concludes our presentation. And I think the next slide is just offering up for questions.
Yes, thank you, Crystal and Jamie and Supervisor Gustafson. We're going to move into questions now, and we know we have a lot of them. So first off, I know we got some questions regarding what parts of the county this ordinance applies to. So Supervisor Gustafson, could you maybe speak to that first?
Absolutely. When we approached this topic, we did propose it initially to maybe look at the whole county, and we got quite a bit of feedback down the hill. So this only applies to Eastern Placer County above, and I'm trying to remember what our elevation was that we captured. Does anybody?
I think it's 5,000.
5,000?
Yeah.
So 5,000 feet and above was the delineation for where it applied. So I know there were like 3 or 4 people that are on the line. You can leave. This doesn't apply to you. And it really is focused. 95% of these are located in this Eastern Placer region.
Thank you. And then I know we've gotten quite a few questions both in advance and this evening regarding the change speaking to not allowing rentals when you have an open building permit. So I'm wondering, Tim, our Chief Building Inspector, or Jamie, if maybe you can speak a little bit to the thought behind not allowing rentals while there is an active permit, and maybe the criteria for allowing an STR to operate when there is an active permit. What situations would that be allowed?
I'm glad to take that, Lindsay.
Go for it.
Great. So yeah, again, I'm Tim Wagner. I'm the building official here. I oversee the building department for Placer County, both in Tahoe as well as Western Placer. And these provisions really came out from some unfortunate circumstances during our first year. We've learned about a few instances where we had some guest safety because of homes that were under construction. Some had permits, some did not have permits. And so what we wanted to really do was try to make sure when those homes are under construction with a permit that those areas aren't affecting the guests. A lot of the responses that I saw were right on target with what I'm thinking is, which is why I'd like the building department staff to look at this, is if it's an area that can be secured off for guest safety, or it's not going to impact the guests, then certainly we don't want to preclude you from renting. But if it is a significant impact, or it looks like the area can't be secured, then just during that period of construction, we'd like you to not rent to guests. So it's not as though your permit's not valid for the remaining part of the year. It would just be during those portions of time that it could pose risks to those guests.
Thank you, Tim. And we've gotten some questions regarding numbers on permits and TOT certificates. So maybe Doug, can you first just speak to how we got some of the numbers related to TOT certificates?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Doug Jastro, Transient Occupancy Tax Administrator. The numbers that we have concerning the short-term rentals with TOT certificates, what we're looking at there is that those are current numbers as of today. We ran the numbers, and at certain points, there can be a possibility where there's more than one certificate per property. That might change the numbers a little bit. You could have a property that's managed by a property management company. Some dates, other dates managed by the owner. Each one requires their own separate TOT certificate. So that's a little bit of the reason why the TOT certificate numbers are usually a bit quite a bit higher than the actual properties listed.
Thank you. And Jamie, you touched a little bit on prorating of permits. Can you just discuss that? Just go over that one more time. We've gotten some questions related to how that'll work.
Sure. So for 2020, the permit period was extended several times due to several factors involving COVID, people's ability to rent, the staffing in our offices when those were closed down completely, and we didn't have staff to process permits. So due to those multiple extensions, the permits got issued later and later in the year. So that brings us now to 2021, which we have permits, that were issued all of 2020. Now we have these conflicting dates. The way the ordinance was written, the intention is that all of the permits are issued within the first quarter of the year, and they expire all at the end of the year. That gives us a full financial program for the county to base our enforcement staff and the other program needs on. So this year for 2021, in order to get everybody on board to expire at the end of 2021, be on track for that March 31 date at 2022, during 2021, if your permit expires, say in July or August or September, there will be a prorated fee. So the permit will still expire at the end of 2021, but you will not have paid for a full year if your permit hasn't been in effect for a full year. And again, I know that's a lot of information kind of coming out right now. There will be very detailed information with that prorated schedule provided to all of our current permit holders very soon. They're going to get information on how to renew, some specifics on what their rate will be with the prorated fee, and how that process will work. But the end result will be that all of our permits are brought up to the ordinance's intention, which is to expire at the end of the year with renewals in the first quarter. This is an annual permit. So it's meant to be, you have an STR permit for 2020, you have an STR permit for 2021, not a 12 months from the date of issuance. And this prorating this year will get everybody in that process so that we are on track for how the ordinance was intended.
Thank you, Jamie. And we've gotten some questions related to response time of 60 minutes from the local contact person. And if the complaint doesn't get resolved in that time, what happens? Can you kind of run us through the process, Jamie? When a complaint is received, what happens?
Sure. When a complaint is received, our enforcement officers go into our database to identify who the local contact is. Again, whether that's a local contact or professionally managed, we have all that information available. So callers don't need to worry that they don't know who the homeowner is. We have that information. The enforcement officer is going to contact the local contact right away, advise them of the complaint, whatever it may be. And we always advise them of the 60-minute window. They have 60 minutes to resolve this. Our officer will be coming to the property toward the end of that 60 minutes to verify whether the violation has been resolved or not. When the officer arrives, if the violation is resolved, then things don't go any further. That's what the ordinance allows. If the violation is still occurring, or if the local contact has not responded or not managed the violation, then the next steps will be, depending on the situation, either a warning to the guests and the local contact, or could be a citation. And our first citation is $500. So that's, if the violation's not resolved in that time, then those are the steps we have to take. If violations continue, say through the weekend, we get multiple complaints of the same property for the same problems, then the process for issuing a warning is going to get stepped up to issuing a citation.
Thank you, Jamie. Go ahead, Supervisor Gustafson. Did you want to add any?
Well, I was going to also ask Jamie, we did have a question relative to, does this include calls to the sheriff's department? And I believe that this does not, or does it include the statistics you shared?
So the statistics I shared do not include the calls that were made into the sheriff's department, but our enforcement process does address those calls. We have a very great working relationship with our sheriff department, and they provide us a list weekly of calls that they've responded to that match criteria for noise, parking, other disturbances. We compare that list of calls against our list of short-term rentals. And if one of those disturbances is at a short-term rental, we do follow up and make sure that the property owner or the local contact is aware and issue a warning if need be on those ones. So we have that good communication weekly from our sheriff's department. And when we have officers on duty, if somebody calls the sheriff's department directly instead of the hotline, our sheriff's department have been really great in contacting us. We can take a team approach. You know, we always appreciate them for keeping us safe and keeping the situation safe. If they know it's a short-term rental, they'll call our officers to come out because they're really the subject matter expert on it, and we can work together on those.
Thank you, Jamie. Another question that we got was with if a complainant doesn't get a response or the issue isn't resolved, should they call back or should they call the sheriff at that point? What should they do if the nuisance continues?
If it's before midnight, they should call the hotline again so that we can document that the problem, you know, sometimes some people will quiet down when we show up and then we find maybe a half hour, an hour later, it starts back up. So if the person or the neighbor calls the hotline again, we can address it right away. And that's going to escalate the situation. We're no longer going to be in a warning type situation. They've already had a warning. We've already gone out. We've tried to resolve this at our lowest level. And if we have to come out again because it's picked back up or not resolved, then that's going to escalate in our enforcement process.
Great. And then another question we got, Lindsay, sorry to take over, but I saw a couple of these in a row. How many of these that you've responded to have actually been owners or relatives of owners versus short-term rentals? Do you have an estimate on that?
You know, I don't have an exact number on that. During the December shutdown, that was definitely the case that we found, is that a lot of those calls coming in were people that were either the owners or the immediate relatives of owners. Just like you said, they felt like they wanted to quarantine during that stay-at-home period at their second homes. We do find, and there's no way for a neighbor to know whether the home's occupied by a renter or an owner. And that doesn't stop us from responding to the call. We get there, and if it is an owner, then we can document that. We know that there's an owner in place. The enforcement rules aren't the same, but it doesn't change our response to a complaint.
And thank you for doing that. I do know that one of the concerns in the question was then short-term rentals through the permit process are paying for your salary and our enforcement team's salary, yet they're not the cause of it in that situation. It's actually the owner or the owner's family that's the cause. So that's noted, that our ordinance we're talking about tonight is regulations on short-term rentals. We don't have ordinances on our full-time or part-time residents as of now, other than our regular noise ordinance where the sheriff will come out. Right.
And we've had a very few, but we have had a couple calls where it is owner occupied. It's their noise complaints. They're not resolved. We let the callers know, you know, at that point that it is owner occupied. So what we're able to do is pretty limited. But if they're continuing to have those noise complaints, referring them to the sheriff, just as you said, because the county does have noise ordinances in place outside of the short-term rental program.
And Jamie, while we're talking about citations, we just got another question related to who's responsible for paying the citation. Is it the renter or the owner?
We have the authority through the ordinance to issue citations to both. So really the ultimate responsibility is on the owner. They're the ones renting the property, creating the rental agreements, those type of things. But if it's a repeated noise violation and the owner or the local contact is attempting to resolve it, and we see that effort and the guests are not receptive to that, then we can issue a citation directly to the guest.
Thank you. And I know we've gotten some questions related to, kind of why the difference between professionally managed and privately managed properties in the permit fee, and also related to fire inspections. Jamie, I don't know if you want to touch on that, or Supervisor Gustafson or Crystal. Supervisor Gustafson, I see you unmuted first.
I unmuted. When we studied this issue going into establishing the very first ordinance, we found our local professional management companies undertake many of these requirements already. They already required bear boxes, bear bins, garbage pickup. They are taking the garbage away if it's overflowing. They're dealing with it on site. We also found that most of them that we talked to had already banned charcoal grills and wood burning facilities. So they were already making sure the properties were safe and secure to protect their own liability for renting them. So we really did make that differentiation between those and then individual owners. And it's not to say individual owners don't do the same, but we don't have a business license or a professional license involved with those. And so that's why we made that differential. We asked them to be inspected more frequently because we don't know who's inspecting them and what changes can occur. I hate to say that some people might put in a fire extinguisher in the right location and then pull it out after the inspection's done, or move a grill and then bring it back. And so having more frequent inspections of those ensures all of our safety. And so that was why we did that initially. And then I defer to Jamie as far as, response time and dealing with the property management firms versus the others.
So similar to what Cindy said, we find with our property management, because it's their business and it's their business license that's being used to conduct that operation, we have a quicker response time often, and they have often a more formal process in place for how to respond when there are complaints. They often have their own security teams, they have their own maintenance teams for trash complaints, that type of thing. So we do find that, again, not that privately managed properties don't take care of those things, there's just a little bit more of a sense of responsibility on the professionally managed, because it's their license on the line and their business on the line.
We did assure the public, by the way, and I'm remembering this from the last time because we had a lot of questions when we adopted the ordinance, and we said, we'll give it a year. Of course, this year was not a good indicator, but if in fact those equalize and we don't see the need, if we don't have demonstrated difference, then our fees are set on cost recovery. And so if we're not spending more time and more energy on those homes, then we wouldn't charge as much in future years. Unfortunately, this year, we don't have a good track record to make those assumptions on at this point. We really need to study it another year. And we didn't feel the fees for most of these units represented more than 1 to 2 nights of lodging for year-round, those that are renting. That the fee that is being charged, I know I saw some comments that it's too high, and our TOT rates are too high, but truthfully, we looked at the numbers throughout the state of what other jurisdictions were charging for such permits, and it was right in alignment, and yet our room rates on average are quite a bit higher. So it seemed like a fair rate, and certainly we will look at that. And hopefully now that we've got our whole database set up and we have hopefully a good year ahead to study this, we'll be able to get back to everybody and see if those rates are justified. Our board is not one to want to overtax or overregulate. I can assure you, my counterparts on the board, this was a big stretch to get them to adopt an ordinance like this. So I'm happy for their support, and we're going to have to justify those moving forward.
Thank you. And we've gotten a few questions. Doug, I think this one is for you, related to it was host compliance and what role they have. I know we've got a new partner. Can you kind of explain what that company does and how they help with our program?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'll be happy to. So we signed a contract, Placer County and Host Compliance, in November of 2016. And basically what they were doing for Placer County is they were going to the online platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, and basically finding the properties that were listed on those sites that didn't have a transient occupancy tax certificate. And since they've were on board and to today, so 2016 to today, we've had an increase of about 1,500 TOT certificates. So it's been a very effective program. In the past year, we shifted from Host Compliance to Deckard Technologies. They're a great innovative company. What we found is that they're actually have superior software and programming on this. We've been able to identify a lot of properties that that don't have TOT certificates. So as Jamie was saying earlier, TOT and STR, while the programs are absolutely separate, we do work hand in hand. We need to find these properties that are out of compliance with both ordinances, TOT and short-term rentals. And with our new company, Deckard Technologies, they've done an excellent job. They're even capable of looking at future reservations. So that helps us out quite a bit when we see that there's listings that have future reservations being made without a TOT certificate or an STR permit. And we're able to proactively contact those owners or operators and get them into compliance with both ordinances.
Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
And then 2 questions we've gotten related to the proposal on a decrease in permit fees related to folks being near town centers or transit. Crystal, I wonder if maybe you could speak to that.
Sure, yeah. So the idea is to, when the short-term rentals are near town centers or transit lines, they're hopefully using the transit that would get them to their destination, particularly with the recreational destinations. And so this is the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency has been, definitely, well, they've got provisions related to short-term rentals. And so they're interested in local jurisdictions' efforts to regulate short-term rental ordinances. And one of the things that they would like to see is that local jurisdictions encourage short-term rental use within town centers or village centers and along transit lines as a way to support the use of transit. And so that provision was added in response to that.
Thank you, Crystal. And Supervisor Gustafson, I know we're talking about short-term rentals. We did get a question related to the T-bid. So maybe if you just want to briefly kind of talk about that and how that interacts with everything else going on in Eastern Placer County.
Well, I think the question was related to North Star and what's included, and they were confusing this discussion with, or not confusing it, but layering the T-bid on top of that. So the Tourism Business Improvement District is proposing a 2% increase in lodging revenues, and that's a pass-through to the renters on the lakeside, 1% in the Squaw Valley region, and 1% in the North Star Valley region, all properties, and that is all lodging properties. And then on top of that, the T-bid is also assessing 1% on food and beverage and 1% on recreational activities, ski lift tickets, those sorts of things, many of which have never paid sales tax or lodging tax of any kind. So I don't want to get into all those details, but in the question related to North Star, it's 1% for anybody in that valley that would be layered on. So they'd be paying the equivalent of an 11% TOT moving forward. Squaw will be paying the 12%. They have an existing T-bid plus the new 1% T-bid. And then the lakeside will be the equivalent of 12%. The reason North Star was exempted at the 1% is because of the extensive transit system they already provide in the valley. And they won't be gaining those. We're proposing to use quite a bit of the freed up TOT to provide transit in the other area, and they won't be benefiting from that. So that 1% was a fair market. I also saw another question relative to my explanation on why we charged a differential with professionally managed companies. And they said, well, how did you justify it to begin with? Because we already had indications that we were collecting TOT and we weren't having to pursue people that weren't paying their TOT with the professionally managed firms. That was another reason why we know the professional firms are out there, they're collecting the TOT and they're submitting it on time, and we're not having to chase them down. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but we're completely open to studying it and looking at the real numbers moving forward.
And Supervisor Gustafson, you were just talking about TOT and funding. We had gotten some questions in advance related to what does this TOT go towards? So maybe can you just speak a little to
my gosh.
I think it's important to share maybe some new folks to this conversation.
Yeah, so traditionally our TOT, now this is pre a TBID discussion because everything changes if the TBID is successfully passed next week. But traditionally 60% of the TOT is set aside for Lake Tahoe services and promotions. So about, I want to say just under $4 million went into promotions, marketing, visitor education, visitor centers, special events, 4th of July, various other types of activities in the region. It also greatly funds our transit system and many other services that we have here in North Lake Tahoe. 40% of the TOT received goes into the county general fund, and it goes for many other services throughout the county. So that has been the traditional breakdown on TOT. With the TBID, if the TBID moves forward next week, then that the 60% that was, or about the $4 million that was being used for marketing will now would then go into transportation and housing solutions. So that's the big change if the TBID moves forward.
Thank you very much for touching on that.
That's without me having a chart in front of me as to how we spend it all. Sorry.
It all goes to very important services. So thank you for that. And we've gotten a few questions related to the HOA exemption and how HOAs can do that. Jamie, can you speak a little to what's required? And if an HOA is interested, maybe what the process is for that?
Yeah, so the exemption process is in place if a property is within an HOA or another setting similar to that where the issues such as noise or trash or parking would be resolved by the management on site, like an HOA would have. Cindy mentioned a lot of those condos early on had rental offices right there. They have people on site managing. So the idea is an exemption would be granted or allowed if the need for the county's enforcement team wasn't there. If a property is within a setting where all of the regulations are in place where there are regulations for enforcement of noise, enforcement of trash issues or parking issues. And what we look for is not only that those regulations are in place, but there is some type of enforcement procedure. Is it a fine to the property owner, something to that effect, that essentially takes the place of the county enforcement having to respond? If a property is within that setting and complaints would be resolved there, and there's not a need for the county to respond, then they could be exempt from needing a permit. There's a lot of information about the permit and the application on the webpage, the STR webpage, that has not only the information, but an actual application for that.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And then, we've had some additional questions related to why the county doesn't create an arrangement with Airbnb and other short-term rental platforms to just collect the taxes directly rather than folks having to submit it to the county. Doug, I know you've been involved in that process. Can you speak to a little bit why we do it directly with the county?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you this up front that we have been talking with Airbnb for quite some time, trying to hopefully work out an agreement that works both for Airbnb and Placer County. It kind of comes down to a conflict between Airbnb's requirement for confidentiality amongst their customers and Placer County's need for disclosure on this. As Supervisor Gustafson was saying, the TOT is used for various purposes within Placer County. Certain percentages go to certain areas, and also there's the eastern slope and the western slope. So the money is divided that way as well. So we're still trying to find a way where we can have the disclosure that we need on our end and still satisfy Airbnb's need for confidentiality. But again, with that being said, that would provide some convenience to have the money automatically collected through Airbnb. But we do have resources, as I was talking about before, with Deckard Technologies that allows us to identify those properties, reach out to those operators, and make sure that the compliance level are as close to 100% as possible. So an ongoing effort, to be sure.
Thank you, Doug. And we've gotten some questions related to fire inspections. So Supervisor Gustafson, I know you had meetings with all of our local fire districts. Maybe speak a little bit to why we have the fire inspection as part of this process.
Well, absolutely. The fire departments were very concerned because there had been some structure fires in which rooms had been rented or occupied that did not have emergency access. And unfortunately, there was a death, not in our county, but in a neighboring jurisdiction here in Tahoe due to that. So making sure the properties are safe is critical to us. The visitor doesn't know and assumes that if it's being rented, that it's a safe property for them to rent. And they don't necessarily have recourse when they get there to understand, are the smoke detectors working? Should they be sleeping in that bedroom that doesn't have a window or an exit other than the doorway? Those sorts of inspections were really important to the fire departments, and we wanted to work with them. They get a lot of calls and a lot of issues, chimney fires and other things from visitors renting homes not familiar with the area, and so they wanted to make sure they had a chance to inspect those. So that's I didn't see all those questions, Lindsay, so I may not have hit on all the talking points on that.
Yeah, no, I think that was good. It was mainly just kind of why fire inspections, and you answered that. We've gotten some questions related to, how, do we pay attention to ordinances in some of the surrounding jurisdictions since, we are one giant region. Jamie, I know you seems like do pay attention to what's going on in other jurisdictions. So maybe just speak to that and how maybe we incorporate other ideas or learn from past mistakes from other folks.
Yeah, as you said, we're all one big region, right? A lot of people just clump Lake Tahoe all into the same place. We do definitely pay attention to what's going on around us, our immediate neighbors, town of Truckee, that type of thing we talk with. We even share complaints with. Sometimes they'll get a call for us, we get a call for them, and we talk with them a lot. We also keep an eye, of course, on what's happening on the South Shore. The city of Southlake had some pretty big changes, and El Dorado County, geographically is a little more like our area where they don't have a big town center. So those are definitely areas that we look at when we are examining how our ordinance works. I can't speak to when the ordinance was first created. I'm assuming that a lot of research went into what other areas are doing, but we definitely keep an eye on things. One of the things when we look at Placer County in relation to all those surrounding jurisdictions is our ordinance it is a very reasonable ordinance for our guests and for our property owners and for our neighborhoods. We're really working hard to create this bridge between all of the different parties rather than excluding any one set of our interested population. So we do look at them definitely. We take it. In fact, we've been looking at them a lot lately as we did these ordinance updates, seeing what other people are doing about parking or trash, those types of issues.
Thank you. And Jamie, we have gotten some questions related to chronic callers. What happens if a property, maybe there's someone in their neighborhood that's not happy with their rental and they just call all the time, even when there aren't problems going on. How do you deal with that issue?
So unfortunately, that is something that happens. We do get chronic callers. We do get callers that have been very clear that they're going to call no matter what because they don't want a rental in their neighborhood. Everybody's allowed to call. We don't have any rules that you're only allowed 3 calls per night, anything like that. We respond to each call. And again, we follow up. We can't assume that because it's a chronic caller that, 5 times the call was unfounded, we can't assume that the 6th time it's not going to be an issue. So we do deal with those just as we deal with every other caller. There is nothing in the ordinance that prohibits somebody from calling as many times as they want to. But that's the importance of having one of our enforcement team verify the calls. We're not issuing citations based on a phone call alone. We need verification either from our enforcement team, from Placer County Sheriff, or from our fire districts.
Thank you for that. We got a question, Doug. I think maybe you could speak to that related to, have we seen a change in the amount of TOT certificates after we put this ordinance into place?
Yeah, there has been a slight decrease. Last fiscal year, we had 4,965 TOT certificates. As of today, we have a little bit more than 200 fewer, 4,721. One reason for the decrease, I mean, certainly, with COVID, I think that has definitely had an impact. But again, with the coordination with the short-term rental permit program that requires a TOT certificate, I think we've seen a lot of TOT certificates close due to the fact that a lot were kept open where there was no rental activity. So we've had quite a bit that people would respond on a quarterly basis, which is required for TOT, and just post a 0 rent received. And so I think that that with the short-term rental permit program, that cleaned up a lot of kind of those non-active TOT certificates. We know that that's one reason why we've seen a slight decrease. But from last year to today, a little bit more than 200 fewer.
Thank you. There was a question related to bear box grace period. Jamie, how much time do folks have once they have a permit to ensure that they have a bear box? Is that something they need to show right away? And if there is a grace period, what's the idea behind that?
The ordinance states that a property owner has 12 months from the date of issuance to have a bear box installed. We do find the majority of our properties already have bear boxes. It's pretty common. So in the initial application, somebody can mark that they already have a bear bin. But the ordinance does say within 12 months that gives somebody time to order one, have one installed. We can't order a bear box company to respond quicker just because it's a short-term rental program. So the allowance gives the property owner time to get that in place. And then of course, during the winter, they can't dig in the ground to install those. So that's the reason for the allowance of that time period.
And Jamie, can you speak to a little bit about trash requirements and the Board of Supervisors just took some action to ensure properties that are being lived in have trash service. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the separate from short-term rentals, the county is looking at, ensuring that all of the properties within the Tahoe Basin area have trash service. That is a requirement in the Tahoe area that properties have trash service. There is an allowance if a property is not being used that they can apply for an exemption on a quarterly basis. However, if that property is a short-term rental, then they are not permitted to get that allowance for the quarterly exemption. So a short-term rental property needs to have trash service all year round. They don't get that same quarterly exemption for not using the property. I think that's, you're broken up a little bit, but I think that's what we were talking about. So all the properties in the Tahoe area of Placer County are required to have trash service. I know environmental engineering and their vendors are working on identifying all those properties, making sure that everybody's brought into compliance on that. And we're working with them, sharing a list of STRs so they can make sure if somebody requests that quarterly exemption from service, that it's not an STR. They'll compare against that list. And then sharing the other way, they've sent us a list of people that don't have trash service so that we can look and see if it's somebody that we can address on our side, if we need to contact them also about their trash service.
Thank you for clarifying that. We've gotten a few questions, related to, do I have to have a bear box if I take my trash away? Do I have to have a bear box if I leave it in my garage? So just confirming, Jamie, if you're short-term renting, you have to have a bear box, correct?
You need to have a bear box within 12 months of getting your permit. And even prior to that 12 months, you need to have garbage service at the time you apply for the permit. I know there's a history of some people choosing to take their own trash away or wait and have house cleaners take it away. That's not allowed in our ordinance. You need to have trash service. And again, clarifying, separate from short-term rental, the requirement for trash service is in place for all of the Tahoe Basin area of Placer County.
Thank you very much. And we've gotten lots of questions, so thank you everybody for continuing to submit those. Just trying to make sure we're touching on all the different issues. Maybe Tim, can you actually speak? Somebody asked about complaint system and just kind of in general, the philosophy at Placer County that it's a complaint-driven system. And so that's why, we have to wait for a complaint. We don't have officers just out patrolling all the time.
Yeah, sure. Glad to speak of that. Well, obviously, Placer County is geographically a large county, and so it'll be difficult for us to have officers in all areas. But specifically, land use is a compatibility thing, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually looking for that compatibility in the neighborhood, and so. So citizens are certainly helpful to communicate that to staff so we can get out there and make sure that, whether it's short-term rentals or traditional code compliance issues with, junk or garbage or somebody building without permit, we just want to make sure we're there servicing and being available for that. So in all those instances, again, we just don't have the resources to, even with the additional staff Jamie mentioned, just to be in every neighborhood at all times. So we do look for that complaint process, and that also validates too that we're just not getting anonymous complaints that have staff looking at things that aren't a real issue, or secondarily a way for staff to follow up and have a discussion with the complainant about what the nature of the complaint is, where in particular it is, because sometimes the properties can be large in nature and staff can't tell where that complaint could be. So just for a variety of reasons, in my tenure here, almost 15 years with Placer County, written complaint process has worked very well. And it's helped us balance out really what kind of the ground truth is out there and keeps away from using the county as a tool, just folks coming forward and appropriately having services rendered from us. So.
I will add, Lindsay, that we do have our officers are out in the neighborhoods, even if there's not a complaint received. Just as Tim said, we don't have staffing to be in all the neighborhoods all the time, but our enforcement officers do make it a point to be spending time driving through neighborhoods, seeing if there's things, that they can address proactively if they see a lot of cars on a street in front of a short-term rental, but we aren't relying on that part, but we do have them out there. And the other side of that is being able to offer enforcement. We have a lot, our officers are, like I mentioned earlier, these cars have a big logo on the side with the phone number and they're very visible. And we have a lot of people that come up to our enforcement officers and ask questions. What are you doing out here? What do you guys do? What's your program about? And having them out in those neighborhoods and in those communities gives us a really great opportunity to provide information, give the hotline number, give good neighbor flyers, give trash or bear aware information out. So our officers are out and about. They just, like Tim said, the size of our jurisdiction, we can't be the entire area every night, at all times.
Thank you. Yes, I believe we have 160 road miles in eastern Placer County, so that's a lot of territory for code enforcement to cover. Supervisor Gustafson, did you want to add anything?
No, I know there's a few more questions, and I just wanted to reiterate, if people want to email us comments, we'll put up Crystal's slide. If their question didn't get answered and they want to address it as part of our ordinance revisions, we want your input. We want to make sure that we address these. And so we'll put that back up at the end so we make sure we get back to you if you haven't given us your email, so that we can respond to that. But we want your input on these. The other thing is, Lindsay, there's several questions about either banning or restricting short-term rentals. And as I mentioned previously, our board is not a group of individuals who want to restrict people's personal and property rights values, and who you pick to get a permit does change the value of their property, and those decisions have been fraught with problems in other jurisdictions. So we really wanted a year of studying the issue to see if we could address it through enforcement on the nuisance issues, the primary concerns of those nuisances, before we made any radical decisions to take it any further, because so many of our homes were built as vacation homes, and vacation rentals have been part of this economy for many, many decades. Certainly with the advent of Airbnb and VRBO, that has increased the numbers, but we've also seen a decrease in full-time residents, and we're working on that element through trying to incentivize housing programs. So I won't say we'll never get there to limits. We may get to limits, but we're going to do it in a thoughtful manner where we really can study who would get those permits, who wouldn't. If you look at some of our condominium complexes, as I mentioned, they were designed to be rental offices right at the front as you go into Rocky Ridge or Chinquapin or Tahoe Tavern, Tavern Shores. And so that was the model they were built on and people purchased them on. So are those included in the neighborhood issues? There's a lot to think through before we start taking away or limiting permits. We want to address the nuisances because our quality of life is really is important to us. And we think we can make great headway there and maybe take the next step once we have a handle on that. So.
I will share the slide with the email. We did get a few last questions. I know we're coming to the end of the meeting, but just related to in what instances would you restrict or not issue an STR permit? Also, how might a permit be revoked? So maybe Jamie, if you could just touch on that.
So a permit can be revoked if there are 3 verified citations within a 12-month period. So again, remembering the process of a complaint, a violation, a citation. If a property's received 3 verified citations within the 12 months, then their rental permit can be revoked in that sense. The other reasons a permit may not be issued is if they don't meet those ordinance conditions, they don't have trash service, or they don't have appropriate parking for a rental, that type of thing. And with the ordinance update, if these updates are adopted, if they have a some type of a building permit that would make the property unsafe or that would compromise the habitability of it, if there's not a cooking or sanitation facility, then we wouldn't be issuing a permit to those properties.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And up on your screen now, you should have the program information. Again, it's got the website where you can go to learn more about the STR program. where you can email if you've got questions on the program. I know some folks have been sharing their email in the chat. We will save those and respond back to you if you did share your email. And then you can save these phone numbers. Again, the phone number, the 530-581-6234 is for program information. If you do have a complaint on a short-term rental property, then you will want to call the short-term rental hotline listed below. So again, we are coming to the end of the meeting. Supervisor Gustafson, did you want to share any more thoughts, wisdom with all of us?
I don't know about wisdom. I definitely appreciate everybody's participation. We've really held on to a lot of participation tonight. I know this is a very important discussion in our community and many communities across the state and the nation. You know, the change in our communities is concerning to many folks. It isn't just about short-term rentals, though. We find 42% of our visitors are day visitors, and they're creating impacts as well. And so how we live in harmony, how we educate, how we help each other get along in this community and enjoy this beautiful place. We don't own Lake Tahoe. None of us who live here get to own it. We get to share it with a lot of people from all over. And so trying to work on these nuisance issues and trying to educate and support each other, I think is the way we'll get through this. So I just so appreciate everybody's time tonight and interest. And we are here to listen and tweak this ordinance before we get it to the full board so that we make sure we improve it and clarify it as we move forward. And this won't be the last shot at it for sure, as you can tell from a lot of the discussion we've had tonight. So thanks again, everyone, for attending. And Lindsay, thank you so much for moderating. There was a lot of questions there. I think well over 140 questions so we didn't get to them all, but we will urge you to get those to us through the channels that we provided.
All right, thank you all very much. Everyone have a great evening, and we appreciate your attendance.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.